A billionaire accustomed to controlling everything meets a deaf artist who sees straight through her armor. What starts as curiosity becomes a love that defies words, worlds, and the expectations of everyone around them. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Every corner of the charity gala was filled with expensive gowns and carefully practiced smiles, the sort of polished world Isabella Moretti had long since mastered. She drifted through it like a queen surveying her court, an elegant figure in a black silk gown, her diamond necklace catching the light as she offered gracious nods and witty remarks. People loved her here. Investors, admirers, even rivals orbited her like moths to a flame. To them, Isabella was untouchable, self-made, brilliant, glamorous. But as she raised a glass to her lips, her eyes scanned the crowd with a detached weariness. She knew the pattern too well. Men tried to impress her, women tried to flatter her, and everyone tried to use her name. Then, for the first time that evening, her attention caught on someone who wasn't watching her at all. Near the edge of the room, away from the golden chatter, a young woman sat with a sketchbook balanced on her knees. She was sketching furiously, her dark hair falling in waves that half hid her face. While the rest of the gala sparkled with performance, this woman seemed utterly absorbed in her own world. Curiosity tugged at Isabella like a thread. She excused herself from a conversation about market shares and moved closer. The sketchbook came into view, charcoal lines capturing the very room around them, guests reduced to honest shapes and shadows, stripped of pretense. Isabella smiled faintly. How rare, in a place like this, to see someone cutting straight through to the truth. Beautiful work, Isabella said softly, her Italian accent curling around the words. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes, dark, sharp, and startlingly alive, met Isabella's. For a heartbeat, Isabella thought she hadn't been heard. Then the woman gave a small, apologetic smile and reached into her purse. She pulled out a notepad and scribbled quickly. Thank you. I can't hear you. I'm deaf. Isabella froze, taken aback. She had not expected this. People usually strained to hear her. Yet the woman's quiet honesty disarmed her more than any flirtation ever had. She took the pen the woman offered and wrote beneath the words. I'm Isabella. And you are? The woman's smile deepened as she scribbled back. Clara. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Isabella felt something stir in her chest, a flicker of interest that was not the usual hunger for power or conquest. No, this was different. This was curiosity. For the rest of the evening, Isabella found herself slipping away from the crowd again and again, always circling back to the corner where Clara sketched. Their exchanges were brief, awkward, clumsy even, but they were real. And in a life built on appearances, real was the rarest treasure of all. The gala wound on, music swelling and laughter spilling like champagne bubbles across the room, but Isabella's mind kept circling back to Clara. She had spoken to countless strangers tonight, donors, politicians, socialites, but each exchange blurred together into a fog of rehearsed pleasantries. Only Clara stood out, crisp and clear, like a sudden bell ringing in silence. When Isabella finally returned to the corner where Clara sat, she found her sketching again. The young woman's hand moved with sharp, graceful strokes, capturing faces and gestures with startling accuracy. Isabella leaned closer, careful not to intrude, and let her eyes fall to the page. There she was, Isabella herself, rendered in charcoal. But it wasn't the Isabella Moretti the press knew. It wasn't the confident millionaire in a designer gown. Clara had drawn her eyes softer, her smile faint, as if she could see straight through to the loneliness Isabella thought she hid so well. The realization knocked the air from her lungs. Clara looked up, questioning, as if wondering whether Isabella was offended. Instead, Isabella reached for the notepad again, heart thudding in a way it never did during boardroom negotiations. She wrote carefully. You see me too well. Clara read it, then laughed, a soundless laugh, but her shoulders shook, her lips parted, and her eyes shone with amusement. She jotted down quickly. That's my job. For a moment, Isabella just watched her. So alive. So real. On impulse, Isabella wrote again. Would you paint me? Clara's brows lifted. She tilted her head, studying Isabella not as a stranger but as a potential subject. Then she nodded slowly, flipping the sketchbook closed. Yes. But only if you're honest with me. The challenge was clear. And somehow, Isabella found herself welcoming it. They exchanged numbers, or rather, Isabella handed Clara a sleek embossed card, and Clara scrawled her own on the notepad. When Isabella finally drifted back into the glittering crowd, she felt lighter, her steps charged with something she hadn't felt in years, anticipation. The gala carried on without her heart in it. For the first time in her carefully crafted life, she wasn't thinking about business deals or magazine covers. She was thinking about a quiet artist with laughing eyes, who had seen through her armor in a single sketch. The following week, Isabella found herself standing in front of a modest studio tucked above a small bookstore in the arts district. It was the opposite of her world: no polished marble, no glass towers, no doorman bowing at her arrival. Here, the door creaked when it opened, and the air smelled faintly of turpentine and paper. Clara greeted her with a smile that was simple but warm, wearing a paint-streaked shirt and jeans. No diamonds, no pretense, yet Isabella felt underdressed in her tailored coat and designer heels. Clara gestured toward a chair draped in white fabric, then reached for her notepad. Sit. We'll begin with sketches. Isabella arched an elegant brow, amused. Most people tripped over themselves to please her. Clara, it seemed, gave orders. She sat, crossing her legs gracefully, and watched Clara set up her easel. The young woman worked with efficient focus, movements precise. Isabella wanted to speak, she always did, but here words seemed out of place. Instead, she let the silence stretch. After a while, Clara scribbled something down and handed it over. You don't like to sit still, do you? Isabella smirked. She wrote back. I'm more used to people moving for me than the other way around. Clara laughed, shoulders shaking, eyes glimmering with mischief. She scribbled again. Then this will be good for you. To be seen, instead of always performing. The words sank into Isabella's chest. She had spent her entire adult life performing, for investors, for the press, for the world. Was that what Clara saw already, in just a few strokes of charcoal? The sketching went on in companionable quiet, broken only by the scratching of pencil on paper. Every so often, Clara glanced up, her gaze sharp, as though she were peeling back layers Isabella didn't even know she wore. When Clara finally turned the pad around, Isabella's breath caught. The drawing wasn't flattering in the traditional sense. It wasn't glamorous or regal. Instead, Clara had drawn her with her shoulders slightly slumped, her eyes thoughtful, her mouth not smiling but poised between restraint and yearning. It was human. You undo me, Isabella whispered, forgetting Clara couldn't hear. But Clara must have read it on her lips, because her smile softened into something almost tender. Isabella leaned forward, taking the notepad herself. Perhaps that's what I've needed all along, she wrote. Their hands brushed as she passed the pen back. A small, fleeting touch, but it sent a current racing through her body. Clara blinked, and for the first time, her composure faltered. They shared a long, charged silence. Neither spoke, neither wrote. The air between them was enough. The second session came on a rainy afternoon. Isabella arrived with a small umbrella, her heels clicking against the cobblestones, but she noticed Clara watching the rain spill down the window with childlike wonder. She wasn't hurrying to shut it out. She was simply watching, as if even the storm was worth her attention. Inside, the studio was warm with the faint smell of paint and brewed tea. Clara had set up her canvas already, but when Isabella entered, she handed her the notepad before anything else. Tea? Isabella smiled, unbuttoning her coat. Please. The gesture was so ordinary, so uncalculated, that Isabella felt her chest loosen. No one ever offered her something without a hidden motive. Here, Clara poured her a cup, set it beside her, and returned to her easel without ceremony. As Clara sketched, Isabella found herself restless again, fingers tapping against her knee. She had always thrived on noise, the hum of conversation, the sharpness of negotiation. But in this space, silence pressed on her like a new weight. At last, Clara noticed. She scribbled quickly and handed the pad over. "You don't like quiet, do you?" Isabella hesitated. She wrote slowly. "Quiet feels like weakness to me. Like nothing is happening." Clara studied her, then shook her head gently. She tapped her chest once, then her hands floated gracefully into shapes Isabella didn't yet understand. Still, she seemed to be saying, not weakness. Strength. Isabella frowned, intrigued. She gestured for Clara to show her again. Clara repeated the sign, slower this time, her movements fluid. Isabella copied, clumsy but determined. Clara laughed silently, her eyes sparkling, and gently adjusted Isabella's fingers. The warmth of Clara's touch lingered. Isabella felt foolishly proud of forming a single sign, but Clara rewarded her with a beaming smile. For the rest of the afternoon, Clara taught her small fragments: "Thank you, beautiful, hello." Isabella stumbled, mixed them up, but each mistake made Clara laugh harder, and Isabella found herself laughing too, really laughing, in a way she hadn't in years. Later, as the rain eased and the light shifted gold across the room, Clara set her charcoal aside. She reached for her notepad and wrote with deliberate care. "In my world, silence isn't empty. It's full of things you've never noticed." Isabella read it twice, her throat tightening. She looked up at Clara and, without needing to write anything back, she simply nodded. The silence between them then was different. Not heavy. Not lonely. It was alive. By the third sitting, Isabella no longer felt like a client stepping into a studio. She felt like a guest in a private sanctuary. The air was familiar now, turpentine, wood shavings, the faint lavender scent Clara sometimes wore. She brought a small gift that day, a notebook bound in dark leather. When Clara opened it, her eyes widened. Isabella had embossed Clara's name on the cover in gold. "For our conversations," Isabella said softly, then caught herself, realizing. She touched her lips, then mimed writing. Clara's smile bloomed, dazzling and unguarded, and she ran her fingers gently across the letters as if they were more precious than diamonds. They began to use it immediately. Clara wrote, "This feels like ours," and Isabella, without thinking, wrote back, "It is." Over the following weeks, Isabella rearranged her schedule to make time for the sessions. Her assistants noticed, her board members frowned, but she brushed them off. In Clara's studio, she wasn't CEO Moretti, the woman on magazine covers. She was simply Isabella, someone learning to shape words with her hands, someone who laughed too loudly when Clara teased her signing, someone who let silence stretch without fear. One afternoon, Clara suggested they leave the studio. She led Isabella through winding streets to a quiet park, where children chased kites and an old man fed pigeons. They walked without hurry, Clara pointing out details with small gestures, patterns in leaves, a girl's laughter carrying across the grass, the curve of clouds in the sky. At first Isabella struggled, wanting to fill the silence, to narrate her observations. But slowly, she let Clara's world wash over her. She began noticing too, the way sunlight glinted through a fountain, the rhythm of feet against gravel, the stillness in between. On a bench beneath an oak tree, Clara scribbled in the leather notebook. "You listen better than you think." Isabella smiled, taking the pen. "Because I'm listening to you." Clara's eyes lingered on her face, longer than before. Isabella felt the pause stretch between them, rich and taut. Something unspoken shimmered in the air. But then Clara closed the notebook, tucking it away with a shy smile. The moment passed, and they walked on, shoulders brushing. It was happening slowly, achingly slowly, but Isabella could feel it. The shift. The inevitable gravity pulling them closer. The storm broke suddenly that evening, heavy rain drumming against the studio windows as Isabella arrived. She shook droplets from her umbrella and laughed under her breath, uncharacteristically disheveled. Clara was already there, barefoot, her hair loose, a mug of tea warming her hands. The storm seemed to trap them together, wrapping the studio in a cocoon of sound. Isabella settled into her usual seat, but Clara didn't move to her easel right away. Instead, she scribbled in their shared notebook and pushed it toward Isabella. "You look tired tonight." Isabella smirked faintly, but her heart softened. She wrote back, "The world is heavy some days." Clara studied her for a long moment, then set the notebook aside. Without a word, she reached for a canvas covered in cloth and pulled it free. Isabella's breath caught. It was her, unfinished, but unmistakable. Not Isabella the socialite, not the CEO in glossy magazines. Clara had painted her in shades of storm and shadow, her face bare, her expression fragile. It was raw. Honest. Isabella stood, drawn closer as if by magnet. "It's me," she whispered, knowing Clara couldn't hear, but still needing to say it. Clara's eyes lifted to hers. In them was no mockery, no performance, only the quiet question of whether Isabella could bear being seen this completely. Something inside her cracked open. She reached out, her fingers brushing a streak of charcoal on Clara's cheek. Clara froze, her breath quickening, but she didn't pull away. For a suspended moment, the rain filled the silence, fierce and relentless against the windows. Then Isabella leaned in. Slowly, carefully, giving Clara space to retreat. But Clara didn't move. Her lips parted, her eyes half closed, and when Isabella's mouth touched hers, it was like stepping into another language, one she'd always longed to speak but never known. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant. Then deeper, warmer, a current pulling them closer. Isabella's hand cupped Clara's jaw, while Clara's fingers tightened against her arm, steadying her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Isabella's forehead rested against Clara's, the storm still raging outside but forgotten. Clara reached for the notebook with trembling fingers and scrawled one word. "Finally." Isabella laughed, low and shaken, and kissed her again. The invitation arrived in Isabella's office, a gala hosted by an international charity she had long supported. Normally, Isabella would attend alone, a practiced smile at her lips and her world of power at her fingertips. But this time, she hesitated. Then she looked at Clara, sitting across from her in the studio, and saw the way her eyes lit up when Isabella mentioned the event. "You'll come?" Isabella asked, unsure if Clara would accept. Clara smiled and wrote quickly in their notebook. "I'll try. But it's not my world." "Neither is mine yours," Isabella replied, her fingers brushing Clara's across the table. The night arrived. Isabella's mansion glittered under chandeliers and flashbulbs as limousines lined the driveway. Clara arrived quietly, in a simple but elegant dress. She didn't blend in with the polished crowd, and that was exactly the point. She seemed impossibly real in a room full of performance. Inside, Isabella's world unfolded in its full, dazzling, and exhausting glory, influencers posing for cameras, politicians offering thin smiles, journalists angling for a quote. Clara's hands gripped Isabella's gently as they walked, her eyes wide but calm. Isabella had to guide her through conversations, translating or stepping in whenever a misunderstanding arose. At first, Clara seemed tense, shrinking against Isabella's arm, her eyes catching every detail of the glittering room with quiet observation. Isabella noticed the way Clara's gaze lingered on simple things, the flicker of candlelight, the curve of a hand over a champagne glass, the subtle expression on a tired waiter's face. Later, when the speeches began, Isabella leaned over Clara. She signed slowly, teaching her a few key phrases so Clara could understand the message. Clara repeated them silently, her hands graceful and deliberate, earning Isabella a proud, quiet smile. By the time dessert arrived, Clara had relaxed slightly, laughing silently at a mispronounced toast and letting Isabella hold her hand beneath the table. But the world outside their bubble was relentless. A photographer snapped a candid of Clara, and Isabella saw the look on her lover's face, the sudden awareness of scrutiny, of intrusion. On the drive home, Clara remained quiet. Isabella reached for her hand. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Clara nodded, writing in their notebook. "I don't belong here. But I belong with you." Isabella felt a surge of something fierce and protective. The world might judge, might misunderstand, but this love, was theirs. The night ended with them at the studio, peeling off gowns and heels, letting the city's glitter fade behind the closed door. In the quiet, they laughed, signed, and shared the warmth of a simple embrace, knowing that outside their walls, the world demanded appearances, but inside, nothing else mattered. The next morning, Isabella's carefully ordered world fractured before her eyes. She was scrolling through her phone when the first headline hit. "Millionaire Isabella Moretti's secret romance with unknown artist." Her heart sank. The article was already going viral, accompanied by candid photos of Clara at the gala, smiling, natural, utterly unaware of the scrutiny. The words stung more than she expected: charity project, scandalous distraction, the untouchable heiress finds an amateur muse. Isabella felt a rush of anger and protectiveness. She had built her life on control, on perfect appearances, but this was out of her hands. Clara noticed immediately when Isabella arrived at the studio later that day. She didn't ask what had happened, she only handed Isabella their leather notebook. On the first page, in bold, careful letters, Clara had written, "I saw it. I'm not afraid." Isabella's throat tightened. She knelt beside Clara, taking her hand. "It's not fair," she whispered, the words feeling weak against the tidal wave of tabloids and whispers. Clara shook her head, a small smile on her lips. She wrote, "They do not define me. Or us." Isabella exhaled slowly. Clara's courage steadied her, even as the world tried to shake her. She knelt lower, brushing a strand of hair from Clara's face. "I will protect you. Always." The words, though spoken, felt heavier than any contract she had ever signed, any boardroom battle she had ever fought. Clara's fingers tightened around hers, and Isabella knew that no headline, no scandal, could touch what they had built in the quiet corners of the studio and the slow afternoons in the park. But the tension lingered. Every call from advisors, every social media post, every whispered conversation reminded Isabella that the outside world was relentless. And for the first time, she realized that love, even the truest, could demand courage she hadn't needed before. That night, they held each other in the studio, the rain tapping softly against the windows. No words. No pens. Only the steady rhythm of two hearts clinging together against the storm outside. For days, the headlines didn't stop. Every time Isabella opened her phone, there was another story questioning Clara's place in her world. Friends and advisors offered helpful advice: protect your image, distance yourself, make a choice. But Isabella didn't want to choose, she wanted Clara. Clara, however, was beginning to feel the strain. She had never asked for this life, never wanted the glare of the world focused on her, nor the whispers questioning her worth. She scribbled a note in their leather notebook one evening, placing it on Isabella's desk before she left. "Maybe we are from different worlds. Maybe this was a mistake." Isabella read it, her heart lurching. She raced after Clara, finding her on the quiet park bench where they had walked together weeks ago. Rain had returned, gentle at first, then insistent. Clara sat with her hands folded, head bowed, her figure shrinking under the gray sky. "Clara," Isabella's voice trembled, unsure how to bridge the silence between them. Clara lifted her eyes, the usual spark replaced by doubt. She held out the notebook. "I don't want to be a scandal. I don't want to be a project." Isabella knelt in front of her, rain soaking her coat, hair plastered to her cheeks. She took Clara's hands in hers. "You are not a project. You are you. And I love you." Clara's lips trembled as if she were about to speak, but no sound came. Instead, she signed slowly, almost reluctantly. "But your world, it's too loud. Too much." Isabella shook her head. "Then we make it quieter." Together. I'll take the noise for both of us. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what anyone thinks. I love you, Clara. Only you. For a long moment, Clara just stared, rain dripping down her shoulders, eyes searching Isabella's face. Slowly, the tension softened. She leaned into Isabella's chest, resting her head where it fit perfectly. The world outside might still roar, might still judge, but here, beneath the rain, in the quiet of their hearts, they had found each other again. The gala was in full swing. Chandeliers glimmered like stars, waiters moved in synchronized perfection, and the room hummed with polite laughter and strategic applause. Isabella stood backstage, adjusting the folds of her gown, her pulse racing, not from nerves about her speech, but from the presence of Clara seated quietly in the front row. The crowd expected eloquence, charm, and carefully measured words. Isabella had spent her life giving exactly that. Tonight, she intended to give something different. She stepped up to the podium, facing hundreds of eyes and cameras, and took a deep breath. Her heart beat in time with the rhythm of anticipation. She could feel Clara's gaze on her, steady, unwavering. Instead of speaking, Isabella lifted her hands. The room fell into confused murmurs. She began to sign, slowly, deliberately. Words she had learned over weeks of practice moved across her fingers, imperfect but filled with sincerity. I stand here not for fame, not for appearances, but for love. For the woman who has taught me that the truest strength is quiet, the most profound courage is gentle, and the deepest connection needs no words to be understood. The audience was silent. Some tried to read her lips, some watched her hands, others simply stared, unsure. But all eyes were on her. Clara, Isabella continued, fingers trembling slightly, you are my heart. You are my world. And I will love you, in silence or in noise, for the rest of my life. At that moment, Clara rose from her seat, tears brimming, and walked forward. The applause began softly, then swelled, but for Isabella and Clara, it was as if no one else existed. Isabella stepped down from the podium and took Clara's hands in hers. Their fingers intertwined, signing to each other words no one else could fully hear, full of promises and devotion. They kissed, gently at first, then with the quiet fire of two hearts unafraid, finally unrestrained. The world watched. The cameras flashed. And Isabella realized she didn't care. She didn't care what anyone thought, what anyone said. Because here, in the center of the crowd, she had chosen love. When they broke apart, Clara smiled, and without a word, handed Isabella their notebook. On the page, in bold letters, she had written, "Forever." The world outside continued its hum of chaos and curiosity, but inside their home, Isabella and Clara had built a sanctuary. Their mornings began with sunlight spilling across the studio, the smell of coffee brewing while Clara sketched at the table and Isabella read letters from her charities. The noises of the city seemed distant, irrelevant. They developed routines that spoke of intimacy without words. Clara would reach for Isabella's hand to guide her through a brushstroke. Isabella would trace the lines of Clara's sketch in silent admiration. They learned to communicate with subtle glances, gentle touches, and the shared language of their hearts. One evening, after a long day of interviews and board meetings, Isabella returned home to find Clara painting at the easel. The light from the setting sun caught her hair, turning it into a halo of gold and brown. Isabella approached quietly, watching Clara's fingers move with precision, shaping the world on canvas. She reached out, fingertips brushing Clara's shoulder. Clara turned, smiled, and signed. "You are home." Isabella wrapped her arms around her, pulling her close. No words were needed. They stood in silence, listening to the city outside, feeling the rhythm of each other's heartbeats. Over time, their life together became a beautiful balance of Isabella's busy world and Clara's quiet one. They traveled, painted, and laughed in ways that were theirs alone. Challenges still came, judgmental glances, intrusive questions, but together, they faced everything, always returning to the studio, to the park, to the moments of peace they had carved out. Their love deepened, not through grand gestures alone, but through the daily acts of presence, sharing a cup of tea, leaving little notes in the leather notebook, holding hands as they walked under the rain. Each gesture, small or large, built a life where silence spoke louder than words, and connection meant more than any headline ever could. One night, as they sat together, Clara leaned her head on Isabella's shoulder. Isabella kissed the top of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body, the quiet certainty of their bond. "This is forever," Clara signed softly. "Yes," Isabella whispered, pressing her lips to Clara's temple. "Forever." In the quiet, in the stillness, their hearts spoke. And for Isabella and Clara, nothing else had ever mattered. Years had passed, and the world had slowed around them. Isabella and Clara's life together was quieter now, yet fuller than anything either had imagined. Their home, filled with paintings and sketches, had become a sanctuary where laughter and gentle touches were the language of everyday life. They had traveled to cities both grand and small, yet always returned to the studio where it all began, the place where silence had first spoken, where love had first taken root. Clara's artwork had grown in renown, celebrated not only for skill but for the soul within every stroke. Isabella continued her work in business and philanthropy, but nothing ever overshadowed her devotion to Clara. One autumn afternoon, they sat together in the studio, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Their hands intertwined, fingers tracing the familiar lines of one another's lives. On a nearby easel, a new painting captured two hands, one strong and precise, the other soft and steady, clasped together, a testament to the life they had built. Clara smiled at Isabella, signing slowly. "We did it. Together." Isabella pressed her lips to Clara's fingertips, the same way she had the first night they met. "Yes, love. Together. Always." Outside, the city hummed, indifferent to their quiet world, but inside, everything mattered. Every laugh, every brushstroke, every touch had built something unshakable. Their love had weathered noise, judgment, and fear, and had become stronger for it. And as they sat in the fading light, watching the shadows lengthen across the studio floor, Isabella and Clara knew with certainty, their hearts, once divided by silence and noise, now beat as one. The world could watch, could speculate, could whisper, but it could never touch the truth they carried: love that listens, love that sees, love that endures forever. Turn on notifications bell to never miss a story. Share your thoughts in the comments, we love hearing from our viewers.